Welcome in everyone. Well, and I guess it's happy Tuesday night. This is the last day of the portal being open, the transfer portal for college basketball. Big day today. I think over 80 players so far. I think they've got until 1 minute till midnight tonight. Wow, we're jumping in here with roster needs. Yeah, we're going to get a little bit more into what we talked about yesterday in terms of the coaching staff kind of shutting down the roster, the portal vibes a day before the portal actually officially closes. But over 80 players in today, I'm told, into the portal. Last day to get in again, it's up over 2,500, like over 2,550 total players in the portal. It's insane. But one of the names that's familiar to all Razorback fans is Boogie Fland, Arkansas's freshman 6'2 guard out of New York City, was playing at an all league pace at an all league level when he went out hurt at the end of Arkansas's 0-5 start in league play. And he played the last two games of those injured in that 0-5 start. Arkansas continued to struggle at times, but also started picking up some wins, got some momentum. And Boogie Flam was kind of the forgotten guy, and it was assumed, well, he's just going to shut it down. That was the reporting. He won't play again this year. But he got, had the thumb injury, had surgery, and rehabbed it. And look, oh, thank you, Jessica Davis. Appreciate all your hard work, Kevin. Thank you. Someone else commenting, we need a shooting guard and some other position pieces, but it keeps fading off before I can read the entire paragraph. So he went through all that process, and he could have stayed in the draft and just, stayed off the court and not returned. He wanted to be part of Arkansas's NCAA tournament team, and he was cleared. And so he came back and helped off the bench. When he looked at Arkansas's first, second, the first round of the NCAA tournament, then the round of 32 win over St. John's, first round win over Kansas, and then that heartbreaking loss at the end and went to overtime against Texas Tech, with the winner punching its ticket to the Elite Eight. So Boogie Flynn was, back with the Hogs for that. But when he announced for the NBA draft, it was what was always expected. That was the path. That was the goal. Arkansas is bringing in another five-star McDonald's All-American lead guard who's been promised the same that Flan was. Basically, in my opinion, a starting spot, a starter role, whether technically there are a game or two where he plays off the bench, whatever, he's going to have starter value, starter role, big impact minutes. They got one of those coming back. They got DJ retained. So with today being the last day that players can enter the portal, and this guy's in the NBA draft pool, to me it makes sense that he would put his name in the portal. There's not a place for him in Arkansas. It doesn't make sense with what Arkansas is bringing in. And I just mentioned the two names at that lead guard spot. It's just not going to work with a third alpha lead guard. That's just not going to happen. Arkansas is going to have to find a way for this year to make it work between Acuff and DJ, whereas last year with Boogie and DJ, it didn't necessarily work all that well. It wasn't until Arkansas was down to one primary lead guard that DJ played his best basketball. Guys like Nelly were able to move down from the three to his natural spot at the two. Carter Knox kind of, firming up his role as the mainstay three. It wasn't about Arkansas got better because Boogie went out. Arkansas probably gets better if one of those two lead guards, whether it was Boogie or DJ, because of what happened. Had it been DJ that went out, not saying you should have preferred that, but if it had been that as an example, I think Arkansas very likely could have had the same kind of success that it had once Boogie went out. So it wasn't about Boogie, but there's not a spot for him, And so based on the draft feedback he may already be getting, he's looking at maybe, what if I don't go late first round to mid second round? Or, what if I get a draft guarantee, but the guaranteed money is not as good in over 2 years, which is what most of those contracts are, 2 years, versus what I can get in 1 year. It's kind of equitable at the college level with NIL. And then I'm betting on myself to play my way into a first round pick in the next draft, because once you go through a draft process, you can't redo it if you don't like what the outcome is. So the deadline to withdraw from the draft is May 28th. Yes, I have an eye open over here watching this Milwaukee, Indiana first round, game 2, playoff game in it. The Pacers are up 1-0. Bobby Porter's Pro Hog just checked in. So I'm kind of glancing over at that, not making eye contact with you good people like I should be. We need 3-point makers. Yeah, not enough minutes to go around. There's not in that backcourt. And, you're bringing Malik Thomas in. He's going to be your 2 guard when DJ's not on the court doing that. You might see some Carter helping at the 2, mostly at the 3, maybe some small ball 3-4, but there just wasn't room. And it's smart again for Boogie Fland to give himself another option for a payday if the draft doesn't look like it's working out. So I know that's hard for Razorback fans, especially coming off yesterday when the news was Arkansas staff really adamant right now that they're not necessarily, at a break speed pace to add more roster pieces. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We went through most of it last night, so I'm just going to add an update regarding a second phone call I had with the same Razorback coaching staff member on that coaching staff last night after we did our segment. I think we came on either a little after 3 or a little after 4, but this was later on in the evening. And then I put some of that information over on HogvilleNET. I decided not to come and do another live. It's not that much of a difference in what they said. A little bit of a difference, though, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Right now, we're talking Boogie Fland. So I think this was smart for Boogie. I do. Jiminy. Yeah, the Bucks are in trouble here. Jiminy. Bobby's running the court. He's not an above the rim player, though. So they didn't throw an alley-oop to him. Probably smart not to do that. 3-point shot goes up. Bobby gets a rebound. I don't know if they called a foul on his rebound or if the shooter was fouled. So we're going to find out. I've got the volume off here. Let's focus on the points at hand here, what we're talking about. But Boogie Fland, before he got hurt, over 15 points per game, well over 5 assists. His assist to turnover ratio was nearly 3.7 to 1. So he was one of the leaders not only in the SEC but among freshman guards in assists per game. But he led all freshmen in NCAA Division I in assist to turnover ratio at nearly 3.7 to 1. This was a guy that I thought was probably better defensively than his frame and size and stature might suggest. I thought he was by far Arkansas's best facilitator, best at taking care of the basketball. We saw Arkansas really struggle, even though they started winning games. Part of the reason why they struggled in games as they move forward is ball security, and Boogie was the best at that. DJ much better at finishing off drives to the basket, stronger player. You could argue probably helped you match up defensively because of his, he's a little bigger, a little stronger, a little more veteran. There were some pros and cons with both of them. But Boogie, the last time I talked to an NBA scout about his draft range was a few weeks ago. I reported that on one of these segments, and it was, probably anywhere from the 25 to 40 range. Well, if he felt certain about that, I doubt he's entering the portal. But if some of the feedback he's getting back based on, sandwiching those 5 SEC games, plus the injury, and then plus just seeing him in a totally different light in those next few NCAA tournament games when he'd been out for weeks, if you put all that together, maybe some teams are cooling a little bit on those projections. Maybe the real feedback coming in right now is something a little further out. Well, it makes sense then to put yourself, again, in the portal to give yourself another option to return to school and maybe have a second go at the draft in a year, improve your shot. But look, Evan, and I can't pronounce his last name, starts with an M. He sends me stuff all the time on DM. He's one of the national analytics guys, and he puts a lot of analytics, ranking teams and players. He now has, and I retweeted it when he sent it to me a few minutes ago, probably within the hour. He sent me a link to something he put out today, a big graph listing the top players in the portal. He's got Boogie Fland as number 1 ahead of everybody. So he's got Boogie Fland right now at number 1. So good for Boogie. Arkansas got a number 1 portal prize last year in Nellie Davis. Somebody might get Boogie Fland as the number 1 portal prize according to that evaluation anyway, if he chooses to come back. Now, if the word is he's 100% committed to the draft, a lot of these guys are that are in the portal, and the fact that he went in on the final day, again, probably says, yeah, he's been real serious about the draft process, Why would that change now? This again is just an off ramp, is the way I see it. I don't see it as, oh, this is 50-50 now, or, oh, pretty clear he's likely coming back to school. No, I don't think it's clear, and I don't think it's 50-50. I still think he's really draft focused. So that's the way I see that, even though this news came over today. And so for the fans that are all up in arms yesterday, there's a lot of people that took the messaging is that Arkansas is absolutely not going to take any more. They are completely finished with the 10 they got. And it could end up being that that's true, that they're finished, but that's not what they said. In fact, my direct, and I put it in quotes, so it's not attributed to me. I'm just the messenger. When I tweeted it out, and then when I later talked about it on the segment yesterday afternoon, early evening, whatever time we got on here, was they were said, if someone special becomes available, otherwise they're good where they are. Well, they were associated with several guys that you can maybe put in the special category. Nate Ament was one of them. They hung out for him until the last minute. And it wasn't just until yesterday, I think it was yesterday, it was announced for Tennessee. I mean, within the last 48 hours, certainly. And so we knew that with the 10 they already had, they were still in play for him, or at least they thought they were. They hadn't given up hope on that. And the staff confirmed that with me early last week on Monday. So they knew what they had, and they knew that they were still in play there. We knew Cal said on Thursday in that video where they talked about retention, who's coming back, all the players gone there. They put the pop-up pictures. He said, we're not done yet, right? So it went from that, and for me being told from the staff, keep an eye on a guy like a Ugonna Onyenso, a 7-foot center who played for Cal for 2 years at Kentucky, who wouldn't even be a splash kind of guy that would cost a ton of money. He'd be like your third big man, but it would make sense to do that. We saw what happened to Arkansas's front line last year when you only had three: Trevor Brazile, Jonas Adu, and Big Z. There was injuries. There was all kinds of stuff that caused Arkansas to be thin everywhere, but especially on the front line. Right now, they're rocking with three, and they're 10. Brazile, Malik Ewan, and Nick Pringle. So we talked about that last night. We brought that up. But during that original phone call, and I told you folks about it, that they told me unless someone special comes available, the other thing, we're good where we are with what we got. I started bringing up, well, what about just, back in depth, like we were talking about with Onyenso? No, we got our three. We in other words, the messaging was, we're not under any pressure to do more because we feel good about what we have, unless someone special comes up. Well, so we went through, I spent 20 minutes after saying, okay, taking it at face value, if this is really what's going to happen, here's what your roster looks like. Let's go through it, So we went through everybody and kind of explained, where you would have roster versatility, what things they improved on through the portal. They had to get two bigs. They did that. Check. They checked that box. They had to get more physical. We can debate how much more physical they got, but they did. Pringle and Ewan are bigger bodies than what they had collectively with Big Z and Jonas Adu. Pringle is certainly more physical than anybody had at the center spot last year, or the 4-5 spot when you count Trevor Brazile. And between the two of them, they're stronger rebounders collectively than any combination of two players Arkansas put on the floor last year, unless you want to make the case late in the year when Adu and Brazile really played well together. They weren't necessarily as physical or as big-bodied as these two guys, but they were certainly getting some volume and rebounds. But these guys project from day one to be those kind of volume rebounders where you're not having to hope and wait and hope that it works out. All right, they checked those boxes. What they didn't check was overall depth, frontline depth, adding another body, it's still thin there, I think, and shooting. And you're only going to maybe look at someone who's special to fall in your lap? Wasn't Chad Baker-Mazara special enough for you? No, that was the whole point of the controversy. They didn't want, like the national reporter coming out and saying that Arkansas was in on that, even though we've been hearing that there was something there. So did they kick the tires briefly and move on? Probably. What we went through it last night. I said, look, a guy might look special for now, but at some point, if he's got a $1 million buyout and a $2 million price tag, and there may be some stuff with it, I was told maybe transcript stuff that you have to be concerned about. And there's an injury that may take up to 10 weeks to get over and heal from. There may be enough there, let alone the antics. We always said, was John Caliperry okay with the locker room with some of the stuff this guy brings? There is something to consider there. PJ Haggerty, one of those splash names we talked about. We acknowledged last night. Isn't he special? Second team All-American, American Athletic Conference Player of the Year, dynamic scorer. Yeah, your backcourt's crowded, but could you figure out a way to make it work for a special player? He's special. There's that word. Well, his price tag's special too. He's real proud of what he is as a prospect because he's asking for $4 million. And oh, by the way, I want all those lead guard minutes, or the majority of them. We were on record before all of yesterday's hullabaloo saying that when that got out, that wasn't going to work on either front. So even if you could get the money down, you weren't going to be able to do that for the same reason you can't have Boogie Fland back. Why would you add that guy to be that's demanding lead guard minutes? He's been mostly a 2. He had to play some on the 1 last year, especially when Tyrese Hunter got hurt in postseason. I think it was in their conference tournament, and we saw more of that. I remember seeing it. And I kept thinking, he'd probably be playing a little better right now. One of those games he went off for 42 points. But I thought he could have used a facilitator out there because too much was maybe running through him. But whatever. That was no longer something that Arkansas was interested in. Jameer Watkins, we said it last night. Let's repeat it again. We've talked so much about him. There's reason to think it makes sense for Arkansas in some ways, a lot of ways. Big volume scorer. Can rebound, get 6'7", can fill that ado Theo, not the same exact player, but that 3-4, tweener guy that gives you minutes at the 4 and can also play on the wing. More polished offensively, obviously, than Theo. I'd say Theo, so good, his versatility was so good defensively. I wouldn't put Watkins in there, but it makes sense. And you could argue he's a special kind of player. 18 points per game, 5+ rebounds per game. Will facilitate, knows how to set others up. Not the most efficient guy, but again, another volume kind of guy that could bring you some, all league potential maybe. And no, I was told, I brought up these names specifically, the staff member, I was told no. The first thing I got was a buzzer sound. And I was like, okay, does a buzzer sound mean no? The game ended and the shot was missed? Or... And there was a chuckle like, where was no? At least not now. Not for now. Okay, well, they're not on the table right now. Seems like they might, like they were, now they're not. We got Cal telling us on Thursday in a video that, we're not done yet. Keep eyes on people, right? All that stuff. So I'm repeating some of the stuff last night. The second phone call later, after, so I put that tweet out. I put some stuff on the message board. I did my segment. I don't know, maybe within an hour, the same staff member reached out to me and it was more lighthearted about some stuff. We were kind of laughing about some of it and we ended up back on the phone together. And during that, we, some good hearty laughter about some of it. And I said, you know what? I said, I got you in quotes. I said, someone special. I'm like, if you guys decide to end a back end depth piece or something like that, that might, it might not line up exactly that. And he paused. Well, if it's the right, if it makes sense, I'm like, so they don't have to necessarily be special in terms of, being a splash type of A-list type of, you plug them into the starting lineup and don't ask questions type. Correct. Okay. Well, now we're back to maybe you could add that if it was someone special, or you could add a depth piece later if it makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. I got it. So I went back to the board and added that part, that addendum. Now we're going over that today. Again, I wasn't jumping back on the live for that, but in that same conversation, a couple of things. I'm going to have a recruiting nugget for you. I'm glad we had the second phone call because I got to ask more questions and I got a little insight on somebody that's a 5-star. But the other part of that, NIL came up several times, not in specifics, just NIL being a big factor. And so I'm going back and I'm thinking, okay, we just said it on the show earlier yesterday before I had the second phone call. I thought in my head, yeah, I was talking about guys like Haggerty asking for $4 million and like a Chad Baker-Mazar, when you get his payout and then what he's looking at, it's $3 million at least. Not that you can't negotiate that, but maybe you don't want to be in a point where you're Because if you're talking folks down to a place you're comfortable, you're probably describing them a role that doesn't best suit them, where they can maybe command what they're closer to what they're asking for teams that need them in a role that maybe Arkansas doesn't feel like they need. That's why they get back to, we feel good with what we have. It makes more sense when I start looking at it that way. And when they're bringing up NILs, well, some of these guys are asking a lot. Maybe Jameer Watkins, we haven't talked about much about his price tag, and it wasn't shared with me, but I can tell you this: if it's a lot while you're also waiting on him to see what happens in the draft process, and you can't even figure out if you can draw him out now and get a commitment, maybe you do cool the jets. Let's sit on this for a while. You don't have to be in a hurry. You've got a great core. I never thought Arkansas absolutely had to get a splash guy. I always said, when you start trying to piece them here in the back court and in the front court, if it was somebody like a Watkins, what does that do with Trevor Brazile if you really believe he's ready to take off like he did the last 9 games and you're getting the best out of him? How much does that help you? Is less is more in that sense. The same with the backcourt, bringing an Ian Jackson or a Haggerty. They passed on Lamar Wilkerson. They passed on Jerome Pierre Jr. They passed on Keyshawn Hall, who was more like a Watkins. But these big jumbo wings, shooting guards, big guards, they passed on them. So are we shocked by this? Are we shocked that they're So maybe they want to see what happens now with Carter Knox. And then they got plenty of NIL money. They proved that they weren't afraid to add a splash piece. Again, I go back to Nate Ament. So that's not necessarily a problem, but it's also got to make sense. And so we can give reasons why. Let's go back to Jameer Watkins, why it would make sense. But again, there's more than just how you make that work on the court. There's the NIL part of it. There's the uncertainty of his draft stuff. Maybe they don't have to rush on him right now. Maybe they want eyes off of the moves they're making right now just to, Caliperry is a lightning rod for a lot of things, but he's certainly the greatest recruiter of all time, and there's a lot of expectations. Recruiting's its own sport. Fans, I guess, want to see him win the high school part of it and the portal part of it every time in the rankings. But if he's winning the retention part and he's getting, I looked at Kentucky's roster just for an example. I did that before I came on here. I looked at Kentucky's. Kentucky's bringing 5 players back, but they're not near the caliber of what Arkansas is bringing back. And they also have 13 players based on their high school recruiting and their portal moves. They have a different philosophy. So they got a ton of guys coming back, and they got a ton of guys out of the portal, and a couple of guys from the high school ranks. That's not Arkansas's MO. And Arkansas's retention is much more stout. Kentucky they're trying to figure it out. I'm just using that as one example. Big Blue Nation likes the comparisons. We can make them. So I'm not defending anything. I always thought it was going to be tough to get even one marquee guy. Not that you couldn't afford it, but tough to figure out how do you placate what I don't think you shouldn't get somebody at the expense of not offending guys you're bringing back or recruited. You need a shooter. Go get one. I don't think they're done. After spending 20 minutes on saying, okay, taking it at face value, here's what your roster looks like. Oh, here's why we went through the special thing, because at that time that's all I had, and mentioned some of those, high level top shelf guys, those 3 that we've been talking about so much, Haggerty, Watkins, and CBM. And we came back to the trouble issues that I just went over again. And then I said, do I think they're really done? No. I said, I'm not taking my eyes off this. I don't believe it. I'm not 100% convinced that they, at the end of the day, will convince themselves we're really done. I lean toward probably not. At least 1 or 2 more depth pieces. And maybe you do get an A-list kind of guy and 1 more depth piece. Or maybe they do decide at the end of the day, they're just not comfortable rocking the boat positionally with things they think are going to play out. I don't think it's just about personalities. I don't think it's just about offending people, because Caliperry has a track record of bringing the best in large numbers on the same roster, whether it was from the high school ranks, some of it portal lately, and making it work. I think it's because they think a lot of what they have is going to work, but not just work as role players, but feature kind of guys. And so you bring on your own problems by throwing more of that into the mix. It sounds great, right? But is it? That's my question. I don't think it necessarily is. So, that's where I am with it. I think when this is all said and done, just the fact that Caliperry said last Thursday they're going to do more, and then the kind of the walking it back or whatever, backing off the original statement, it has to be someone special. Now it's more if it makes sense. What did Caliperry say in the previous video at the end of it, or somewhere near the end of it? It wasn't specific. This is the one the week before where it was like 2 minutes. At the end of it, he said, we're going to have retention. I'm going to continue to recruit high school. I'm not going to change who I am. And when he said when he talked about the transfer part, he says, they got to want us. They got to be able to help us and we help them. It's got to be mutual. And I got a feeling when you go through this portal process, especially on some of these A-list guys, some of these asks, wants, and needs with the NIL part, what their roles need to be. Arkansas needs to get guys that make sense to what helps them move the needle next year. Get back to the second weekend and maybe beyond in the NCAA tournament. And so a big name doesn't necessarily help you do that. And throwing a bunch of money just to land that doesn't help you do that. I never thought that they were, once they got the two big men, that they were in a situation where they had to get a special kind of player. But you can maybe figure out a way to make it work. And if they want to do that, great. But if they're not sure about it, why not take their time? Some of these guys, some of the stuff sounds unrealistic based on what Arkansas really needs. So that's where I am with that. Now, I did get some back channel information today from a source who wanted me to know. I hadn't talked to him well. I actually tried to call me last night. I meant to call back, and I was on another phone call and forgot. And then today I called, and I was on the phone with my 30-year-old daughter who's out in Phoenix. We were working through something, trying to help her figure out something. And he called again. I was like, I'm missing that. So I called right back. Bobby P just hit a big three. He's going off tonight. Indiana had a big lead. It's down to 7. BP's playing really well off the bench for the Bucks. Let's see if they can get even here. But I got this back on the phone, this source, and he's like, look, man, I know what the staff's saying. I see what y'all are dealing with out there in the media. I've seen what you're talking about. And I just want you to know that, and this person's connected with the people that are shelling out the monies for the NIL. And he's saying there's a meeting underway, ongoing about the NIL part of it, and that he was told what Caliperry said on Thursday in the videos, we're not done. So from the money aspect of it, I told you the call last night with the staff that was NIL came up several times as part of the, playing into what they might still do. And it wasn't all negative. It was just, that it was really important that they respect that part of the process. So it wasn't a conversation like, we got plenty of that. We can just burn that. Whatever extra we don't spend, we'll just set it on fire. It was more of, this is serious stuff right now, and we're being real careful with that. So the call today was, sorry, I'm so distracted. I know. Pro Hog's going off, so I got to watch that a little bit. But the news today was from someone really well connected with some of the folks funding some of that stuff up there. Is they're meeting, they're talking through this, and they're going to make sure that Arkansas is not done yet. So this will be on Caliperry's. It sounds like it's going to be on him, because we'd already heard he was going to have the resources he needed to get this to where, at some point it seemed like 11. I got that from a source before Caliperry ever said it, and he did say it. So he was on record with that. But, they're at 10 right now, and that includes Isaiah Seeley and Kareem Artal. And it may be that Artal has more of a role helping in that 4 spot, whether it's like kind of like like we commented on Adu Theriot, not the same style of player, not that strength and bully ball type, but 6'7", undersized, can help you at the 4 a little bit, maybe play some at the wing. Maybe he'll factor in a few minutes there to help Arkansas answer that. Maybe they're not done yet. So but we'll just keep our eyes on it. I think at the end of the day, at minimum, the staff just wanted to pump the brakes a little bit, maybe catch their breath, maybe figure out what really is important to finish up, and can't rule out because they were so adamant that maybe they do like what they have so much that when it's all dust settled that they don't add anymore. I'll be surprised if that's true. And I think they got to go get a shooter. I think they got to get someone that can help the shooting. Not to say that guys like Carter Knox and Trevor Brazil with their improvement won't be part of that equation. A guy like Malik Thomas, whose numbers look good at overtime elite. I mean, this is just a totally different level. It's a true freshman. So there's a lot of stuff there to consider when you start talking about, well, what would help? Another frontline piece. I mentioned it. A guy like Onyenso would be great. A backup at a third player at the 5 spot. You could go get another forward. Certainly. It's not a splash guy necessarily, and just be a depth piece as a 3-4 combo or a more traditional 4. Maybe someone that's a little more physical and can maybe block some shots, physical and athletic. There's more than one way to do it. There's a lot of portal names out there. There's still a lot. There was 80 plus in today, including Boogie Fland. It's what we started with. All right, a little bit of intel during the phone call with the staff last night. Staff member asked about Tyron Stokes, class of 2026. I think I told you guys the other day, as you already knew, he had visited number 1 player in the country, 6'7", versatile guy, Notre Dame High School out in Los Angeles. Cal's recruited him, been out to see him in multiple places, including internationally in the last year. There's been scuttlebutt, maybe he reclasses. And I've told you guys the source info was if coming from his mom, his family, the idea was, no, he's going to stay in 2026. Some other people connected with the basketball decisions thought maybe he'll move. They'll figure out a way to go ahead and motivate him to move up to reclass to 2025. He's not going to do spring and summer is the plan. Just do workouts and stuff. Not going to go through the grassroots. So that stuff we all talked about. Then when we knew he'd visited Louisville last year, that's where he's from, even though he's on the West Coast now. Had the weekend visit to Kansas. And that's when I brought some information saying, hey, talking with one of my sources, there's an idea that he's going to maybe take as many as 3 more visits. It was Kentucky, Arkansas, maybe BYU. Some combination of those 3 maybe being, maybe it's going to be those 3 or some combination of some of those teams if he takes 3 more. Was not sure on that. Well, it's come out that he is going to take a visit to Kentucky. That's going to be in mid-May. All right, so that came out yesterday. And when I had the staff member on the phone, having that information and knowing maybe Arkansas will get one, I asked about that. Nothing set in stone or solid on a date, but Arkansas is efforting that. Sometimes, one national guy came out after the Kansas visit was announced before he took it saying, this is going to come down to Louisville and Kansas. Well, we know now publicly there's a Kentucky visit date set for mid-May. And I wouldn't be shocked if Arkansas doesn't actually have a visit set up. It's just not announced, and they're going to let that process play out how they want it to. Or it may be that they're negotiating that, but they're efforting that. And it also tells you that whoever's saying it's going to come down to Louisville and Kansas, and some others saying, well, another person told me it's probably going to be Louisville or Kentucky. All that could be true, but the fact that the staff's saying in real time last night, unless they moved off of it today, and this is just old news, which I doubt they have, because all that stuff was floating out there before the phone call. They're in it. They're still pursuing that. Now, it's looking like he's going to stick with 2026 for now. That's the talking point, and maybe that's real. But you still recruit the guy, and you still do what you can to get him on campus. He's taking visits here in the spring, I guess in part because he's not going to play in spring and summer. He's got all the time in the world if he's working out to figure that out, because his schedule, those spring and summer schedules get a little bit crazy. A lot of obligations with those, a lot of travel. So now he can use his travel maybe, right, to go and visit campuses. So we'll see what he does, and we'll see if Arkansas is in the mix. So a little nugget there the staff is still pursuing. Mika Miernan, it's been so quiet on him. He visited Arkansas last September, 5-star in that 2026 class. A lot of talk about him reclassifying. No one's got a firm grasp on if that'll happen. Alex Costanza, a young man I've covered in the King Cotton Holiday Classic for 2 consecutive years out of the Miami area. Caliperry's been recruiting him since before he came to Arkansas, has been recruiting him since he's been in Arkansas. 6'8", big jumbo wing. Might end up playing a true 4 spot in college, with another wing and 2 guards. We'll see. But he's a guy that there's been some talk about him maybe reclassifying to 2025. And I had another reporter covering another team in the SEC ask me, where do you think Arkansas is with that? And I think Arkansas is still really recruiting him. But I think it was a week or 2 ago it came out that he's made the decision he's not going to reclass 2025. I think Arkansas will still pursue him, but that's not an option for maybe a special ad out of the high school ranks because you didn't get Nate Ament. It's looking more and more like guys like Tyron Stokes and even Alex Constanza are not going to be part of that mix. And then we could circle back on Mika Miron if we can get some word either way, because if he reclasses, that would be very interesting, especially since he's been on campus. Doesn't mean Arkansas would zero back in on him, but maybe they would. We just don't know about that. And he's a guy that could help on the front line. He's versatile. He could shoot. And even though he'd be a year younger than even a true freshman class, might be a guy that you bring in and you develop him and get him for a second year. You just never know if it were to play out that way. So we're always paying attention to stuff like that. All right, 36 minutes in, I'm signing off. I'm Kevin McPherson. I've been a little lethargic today. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, and distracted now. But the portal's closing up. A lot of names in there. Players have plenty of time to decide. It's just they can't enter after this unless their coach gets fired. There may be some other weird circumstance where someone could, but even grad transfers this is their deadline as well to jump in. But until next time, thank you for joining me. Please hit subscribe, like, share, turn on the notifications. It's HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We love doing this. We'll break in if something's breaking. It seems kind of slow tonight. But until probably tomorrow or whenever, thanks for being here. Take care. We'll see you soon.